the Speaker last night met with members of the Republican caucus in the House, the Majority Caucus, and he has presented a revised plan to them now to bring the Ukraine funding, which is always it's a very complicated congressional process, which will be accompanied by more funding for Israel, more funding for US operations in the Indo-Pacific and others. This bill is likely to be put on the House floor this week. Whether it will pass is a different matter, and Mike Johnson's insistence that he will bring this bill this week could also cost him his job.
Right. So I'm going to come to the question of the turmoil on the Republican side of the House affecting the Speaker of the House of Representatives. But on the aid package, if it happens that way, if it's broken into component parts, so there's a plan for Israel funding, there's a plan for Ukraine funding, and of course the border, the US border in there too, is it not then open to the hardliners in the House to simply say no to the Ukraine bit of the deal?
There is, but there's a majority, I think, in the House for this bill passing. The reason it's not come to the House floor thus far is because a group of a small group of Republicans have opposed it. They are supported largely by Donald Trump, and they have acted as a sort of brake on the party machinery, if you like, rather than support for the bill. So this bill is likely to come this week. There won't be a bill actually for the southern border, which has angered a lot of Republicans, and that's where the debate currently stands. Interestingly, Mike Johnson met with Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago last week, and it seems that may have broken the deadlock. It seems that Mike Johnson seems to believe that he's got the support of Donald Trump now to bring this bill forward.
Okay, well, Ukraine and its supporters will passionately hope there's a way to get them the money that they need. And what about the turmoil you mentioned there, Alistair, in the House around the Speaker, relatively new Speaker Johnson? Are we looking at another sort of sight of people fighting like a ferret in a sack and the Speaker falling on his sword?
It could well get to that. Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's a very right-wing member of Congress, she has put forward a bill to get rid of Mike Johnson. It has now been supported by another member of the Republican Party, which means that Mike Johnson will now need Democratic support to stay in office. So the opposition have the power over whether he stays in post or not. It looks like it's going to be a pretty tumultuous few days in the House. Again.
We talk a lot, for obvious reasons, about Donald Trump, but the turmoil on Capitol Hill it's pretty intense a lot of the time and has been for some time. Is that not hurting the party, the GOP?
It is, but of course you've got to remember there are various different factions within the GOP. One of the problems is that they've got a very, very small majority in the House. The Democrats control the Senate, the Republicans control the House, but the party is split. There are those that would see themselves as Republican moderates who would absolutely support things like the bill for Ukraine. There are also others who are more aligned to the policies of Donald Trump, who want to concentrate far less on foreign affairs and much more on domestic affairs, secure the border and so forth. And these people really are only part of the same party by name. Their policies are so far apart, which means that someone like Mike Johnson comes in to try and keep the whole thing together. He has a real struggle in his hands.
All right, Alistair Dorber from The Times in Washington, thank you. Former chair of the Defence Committee, the former Minister Tobias Ellwood, you may have heard in the news, he's been echoing that we need an Iron Dome aerial defence in this country. And what happened to Israel, that Iranian attack, he felt was a wake-up call. So, Iron Dome, can it happen here? Could we have one of those? Tim Ripley is the defence commentator and analyst. Hello to you, Tim.
Good afternoon, good evening.
Tim, is it your view then do you think, an Iron Dome system for our major cities here in the UK, including London, and for vital infrastructure?
Well, the world has moved on since the days of the Battle of Britain, where the Luftwaffe obviously flew across the Channel from France. As we saw at the weekend, Israel came under attack by a combination of cruise missiles, they're low-flying missiles like the American Tomahawk, ballistic missiles, which is a derivative of the old Scud missile that we saw from the 1990s in the Gulf War, and drones, these kamikaze drones that we see over Kiev almost every night since the Russian invasion. Now, these weapons exist today, and the Russians have these weapons. We see them use them in Ukraine. And if you draw a little circle on the map from the Russian enclave of Kaliningrad on the Baltic Sea, their cruise missile, their Tomahawk equivalent called a Caliber missile, can easily fly into Rishi Sunak's Downing Street back window. Famously, in 2022, Boris Johnson was threatened by Vladimir Putin to send a missile into his office, and he wasn't joking. And Britain doesn't have an air defense system. We have obviously the RAF of our fighters who can go and intercept Russian aircraft, but we have no ground-based air defense system based in the UK. We have a few missiles, short-range missiles in the Falkland Islands, and that's it. We've disbanded them all. They all went in the 1990s. So if we want to defend against those Russian cruise missiles and kamikaze drones that could be coming our way in a major crisis, we really need to do something.
Well, if you listen to the Defence Secretary Grant Shapps, we're in a pre-war era and we need to be ready for such an awful eventuality. When you look at what happened in Israel over the weekend, between Israel's air defences and backed up, of course, by America and us, the United Kingdom, 99% of that Iranian missile attack was repelled. How would we fare under something similar?
Well, you compare Israel with Ukraine. In Israel, the Israeli armed forces, the IDF, and the Americans and the Allies have a massive layered network with, defense missiles that can take out the Scud missiles in space. You've got shorter range systems to take out the cruise missiles and the drones, and you've got fighter planes that can pick off the drones as they're approaching. It's a massive system, and it's very expensive. I've heard one estimate that on the weekend, the Israelis shot off $800 million worth of missiles at those incoming Iranian weapons.
Yeah.
Now, the Ukrainians have attempted to do the same thing on a shoestring, and it's not quite working. They're running out of missiles, they're running out of launchers, they can't cover their whole country, and they're suffering badly. You're seeing it every day. I mean, only the other week, their power stations in Kiev got taken out. So this is a serious threat that can, devastate, normal life in a modern European country.
So we are vulnerable compared to Israel, compared to Israeli cities. We are vulnerable.
Yes, and you have also, of course, Russian submarines are equipped with these cruise missiles, so they can sail out into the Atlantic and fire their cruise missiles at us from the west as well. So it's a multi-pronged threat, which requires a multi-directional response to not just defend London, but these threats could come anywhere and hit our nuclear submarine base in Basel, air bases, power stations. The whole lot is vulnerable. So you need to have a response like the Israelis, where you have a layered defense that deals with all these threats at different levels in multiple directions. And
So the debate now is whether we could get or should get our spending on defence in this country up to 3% of our gross domestic product. Would spending even of that order do the job? Would that provide the kind of defence for our cities and infrastructure that we're talking about now, and get our offensive capability up to the mark to face a threat from the east?
Well, you've posed the question is whether you use that with new money that you get by raising defence spending, or you stop doing something else. We've got a limited national pie and limited resources for the Ministry of Defence, so you've got to make some hard choices.
Indeed, and more voices are being raised saying, yeah, we've got to look at that and start making these extra commitments. But the promises to do such a thing, they are pretty thin on the ground, aren't they? We know the state of our public finances. We know where the country is buckling under the tax burden just at the moment. There's no great space for extra borrowing. And look at the demand, though, the kind of money you need to get Britain's defences to the sort of level that those who argue from your position would like to see.
Well, I would argue that it's not just a case of spending more money. You've got to spend the money that you have better. I mean, at the moment, we spend £52 billion a year, and the output that money generates is not as good as comparable European countries compared to France. I mean, in 2020, we spent £40 billion on our defence budget, and today we spent £52 billion. But today we have fewer soldiers in our army, fewer fighter planes, fewer tanks, fewer ships. The output what we get for our money is lamentable. It requires a root and branch reform of how you spend that money to get better value, not just marginal, but drive real change to get huge improvement in the spending. And the sort of processes that the Ministry of Defence has to spend this money seem to be work against producing capability that works. I mean, everything takes ages, everything takes years, decades to deliver something, and then often the stuff doesn't work, and it just eats money in a way that is astronomical, the amount of money they spend and the amount of money they waste. We have programs of tanks that don't work, radar planes that don't work. I mean, we don't have any AWACS radar coverage, radar planes, because the contract to build them is a disaster, and the planes haven't been finished and won't be ready for 3 years.
Yeah.
It's. I mean, I'm loath to say that the problem will be solved by throwing more money at the Ministry of Defence. That is not a given, that giving them more money will make them spend it better.
Yeah, I mean, for as long as I can remember, Tim, and I can remember quite a long way back, British defence procurement has been a rather sorry story, and I can recall different ways of addressing the problem, getting business leaders, successful business leaders, into the business of defence procurement, which hasn't done the trick, if the trick is at all doable. What is the new thinking you have in mind when you say we need a step change in attitudes and the way that we approach it all?
Maybe we need to do less better, because at the moment we try to have what's called a balanced armed forces. We try to have a navy, an air force, and an army that can broadly, be, comparable to our European neighbours, to be better than the French or better than the Germans, whatever how you want to do it. Maybe we need to cut down what they do and concentrate more resources in a few areas, and give up doing things, give up our pretensions of being a global power, give up, the Indo-Pacific tilt or whatever you want to call it, and just concentrate on doing a few things and do it properly, and not spread ourselves too thinly and try and do too much not very well.
So when you say give up our global pretensions, does that mean, don't even think about another Iraq war sort of engagement, because we couldn't and we shouldn't?
Well, I mean, the British Army's gone down from 100,000 30 years ago to nearing 72,000. The idea that we can deploy a division that we sent to Iraq in 2003 and then occupy the country for 5 or 6 years, that's for the birds now. The idea that we've got the troops to do that, and we should not pretend that that is on the cards, because it will end up us not doing it very well, and the whole thing being half-cocked. And concentrate on our neighbourhood, concentrate on, so our aircraft carriers, our Navy concentrates on defending the North Atlantic, rather than sailing halfway on the other side of the world. We just get one ship there. It's just not worth it. The impact that you have, we had the Defence Secretary and the Foreign Secretary going to conferences in Australia, and they had I'm sure they had a great time, but what they deliver in terms of capability is minimal, compared to, the Chinese Navy has like 400 ships. Sending one British frigate to the Far East makes no difference whatsoever to the price of, the military balance in the Pacific. So just don't waste the money. Keep it at home.
All right, Tim, thank you for sharing your thoughts in our briefing room today.